Hi, welcome to this workshop on strategic and operational planning, which has been produced by Kevin Keene of Keene Mass Appraisal Consulting and Jennifer Rearage of Maricopa County, Arizona. While you're looking over our biographies, Jennifer and I wrote this workshop as an aid to the many jurisdictions that we know want to modernize their offices and their mass appraisal processes. I hope that Jennifer will record some of the material that she presented for a future edition. But for now, there's a lot of interest in this workshop, and I want to make it available to as many of you as possible, as soon as possible. Hi, so let's go over some of the workshop objectives. So the objective of this workshop is to develop an understanding of the elements of an operational plan and the process of building one. And it's important to understand that the answers that you come up with doesn't really matter. It's this process that we're going through that is the point of the exercise. So I want to point out some differences between the live and recorded versions of this workshop. I designed it as an interactive experience where participants would work through the exercises together, and then we would come together to discuss everyone's answers as a group. Because everyone comes from different circumstances, there isn't one set of answers that work for everyone. But in this way, participants can find the answers that work best for them. And the opportunities to network with each other and form connections with others is of great value. The difficulty in that format is dealing with the time constraints. This workshop was written to fit within a one-day time frame. As you'll see, there are some aspects of building a plan that are not addressed. There's just too much material to fit in. The recorded version that you're watching has no such time constraints. You can pause the video whenever you like, spend as much time as you want on each exercise before restarting. You can take as much time as you need to go through the entire workshop. In this format, we are missing the interactivity, so I have to give more instruction than I would in the live version. In the live version, I kind of rely on the participants to come up with a lot of the answers through their interactions. And some of the exercises are much more valuable in the interactive format, but it's still worthwhile to go through the process. So there are no wrong answers. There's no bad ideas here as you work through this. You're going to find that some parts of this process are going to be easy for you. Other parts will not be so easy. And the thing you want to do is to recognize where you may need to call for help, either other people in your office or to bring someone in from the outside. It's important that you learn to collaborate. You find people who can help you, kindred spirits, and you want to help each other in this process. So here's the outline of the workshop. We're going to talk about objectives. Then we're going to look at what is operational planning. How is it different than strategic planning? We're going to talk about performing current state analysis, which is looking at how is it that I'm currently doing things? What is it I want to do differently? We're going to talk a lot about how you control the story of your project and what it is that you want to do. Why do you want to do things differently? What do you expect to achieve? We're going to look at some organizational structures because it's very likely that in this process you're going to want to do some reorganizing. Then we're going to look at the various elements of the plan. We won't have time to look at all of them, but we'll examine some of the more important ones in greater detail. We're going to talk about managing your expectations because everyone around you, everyone that's connected with this project is going to have a set of expectations as to what's going to come from it. And you want to be able to manage those so that they stay in the realm of reason. You're going to learn how to build a phased approach and an overall timetable for the project. And then you're actually going to go through the exercise of building a plan. First for your own jurisdiction, and if you find it valuable, you'll have an opportunity to do it for a fictional jurisdiction. Sometimes the distance makes things a little easier. So let's talk about the difference between strategic versus operational planning. If you're among the many counties or municipalities that are looking to modernize your valuation process or mass appraisal operation, you probably already have a strategic vision for what you want to accomplish. But a goal without a plan is just a wish. And what you're probably lacking is a detailed operational plan that will organize the many tasks and necessary elements and guide you through the process of achieving your strategic vision. So if we think of strategic planning as what it is that I want to do, operational planning is more, how will I go about it? Who will accomplish each task? What are the dependencies in the order and the correct order of operations? How are we going to pay for all of it? And what is the overall timetable for completion? So a strategic vision for an assessment office typically includes acquiring a CAMA system or updating a CAMA system, augmenting staff because frankly most offices are understaffed in at least some areas. You probably want to change from a cost-based to a sales-based valuation process. Most likely you're going to need to improve the quality of your data. You're going to want to use regression models, and you're going to want to educate the public about what it is that you're doing. So hopefully these changes are going to result in more equitable assessments, more accurate assessments, and performance that meets IAAO standards. So here's an example of a strategic vision. This is a strategic vision for Maricopa County in Arizona. So understand that this is their published version that's forward-facing on their website, but they also will have a private unpublished version as well, which would include new directions that they want to move in, but they're not ready for presentation to the public. So they start with a mission statement. They want to serve in the highest regard by providing a fair and equitable valuation of all taxable property in Maricopa County, without favor or partiality, while efficiently and effectively administering applicable laws and industry standards. So that's their mission statement. And their vision is to be a best-in-class organization that is recognized for accuracy, transparency, innovative solutions, and high-value services. So they go on to talk about their core values, or they have what's called a value statement. And this will describe your philosophy of service and perhaps your view on innovation and technology. So their core values are to provide fair and equitable service, always do what's right, be honest, accurate, and transparent with property owners, the public, and even their team about their work and how it is performed. They want to ensure fair and equitable property valuations to support the collection of property taxes that are essential funding for valuable community services. So they're already linking property tax with providing services to the community. They want to work as a collaborative team with civility, respect, and compassion. They want to be hardworking, dedicated, best-in-class public servants while conducting all business to the highest quality and providing superior customer service. They want to implement practical and effective solutions that improve the workflow processes, lives of their team members, and the public that they serve. So they're becoming increasingly detailed in what it is that they want to accomplish. So they go on to provide an even more detailed or specific strategy vision. So they're committed to giving their customers the best possible customer experience. Everything's going to be published in digital formats that can easily be circulated and made available to the public. They have a commitment to developing or improving business processes to leverage technology, promote efficiency, and improve transparency. They have processes in place to manage workflows, clear bottlenecks, and make sure that no part of the system is overloaded. They promote a culture of collaboration and knowledge sharing, and they understand the value of teamwork. All right, so you should be finished. So let's see, does your vision include the relationship you want to have with your constituents, the working culture you want to promote, technology that you will utilize, your philosophy of public service. Take a moment to add to or revise your statement before continuing on. So here's your first look at a chart for what may need to be included in an operational plan to achieve your strategic vision. These are some of the many tasks or functions that should be considered in creating your operational plan. Now, everyone won't have all of these things, but this is a good basic roadmap, as there are many elements that will be part of every plan. You will always start with a current state assessment. And the current state assessment is a complete documentation of how your office currently works. We'll talk a lot more about the current state assessment. You're probably going to do a data quality analysis. You're going to want to start a public relations campaign. You're going to look at the way that data is collected, or you're going to want to collect your correct data, that's bad data that you may have in your system. You may need to acquire a CAMA system or build a CAMA system, which would mean surveying vendors, writing RFPs, awarding contracts. You may need to augment your staff. You probably don't have enough people in some critical areas, and you're going to have to come up with a definition of who you're going to need, what they're going to do. You have to write new job descriptions and figure out how to budget for new positions. You may need to prepare data for your new system. You may find in this process that there are things that you need that you don't have. You're going to have to train people. You're going to want to start a public relations campaign. You may want to have the IAAO do an audit of your current processes to give you, as part of your current state analysis, and it's something to present to the public. You may want to have an equity analysis to see, well, how fair and equitable are our current assessments? You will probably have a piece specifically to educate the public. If you want to use spatial attributes in your valuation process, you're going to have to collect and create a spatial attributes file. Many of you who are coming from, if you're moving from a cost approach to a sales approach, you probably don't have the right kind of sales file, and you're going to have to build that. You're going to want to start with baseline ratio measurements to determine how you are currently performing, so that you can identify with every step that you take how much better you're getting. Are you getting better or worse? You may need to institute or upgrade a sales validation program. You may need to build or revise your current way of analyzing neighborhoods. You're going to want to document all of your business processes. If you want to go to using regression models, you're going to have to build or train a modeling team. You're going to have to build models, but that's not enough. You need a way to once if you have models, you need ways to project those values for unsold properties, and then to review those values. And you may need to build both a projection engine and or a market value review tool before you can go and run projection models. Along the way, there's probably going to be some reorganizing that you're going to want to do. You may need to upgrade equipment. You may need to find sources of additional funding. You may need to acquire imagery. So there are many, many steps. And I so often hear the refrains of, gee, if we only had a CAMA system, or if we had regression models, as if those things alone are the answer to all of the problems. Well, they aren't. Those things are tools. They're important parts of a solution, but they are not the solution. There are many steps and considerations to work through. And this is what we're going to be doing for the rest of the workshop. Now, after you've written your strategic vision, the next thing you want to do is to begin your current state assessment. This should be a sober assessment documentation of how your office currently works. And it should include staffing, organization, data, equipment, business processes, workflows, valuation processes, and even your revaluation schedule. You should expect to spend a lot of time documenting your current state. We can't plan where we're going if we don't know where we are. Now, while it's important to review as much documentation as you can, it's also really important to talk to people who are actually doing the work. The interviews are important. They're going to expose the difference between how we think something's done, or how it should be done, and how it's actually being done. So one of the things you can do that will help you with your current state assessment is to contact IAAO's professional consulting services to perform an audit of your operation. Here's the link on their webpage where you can get in touch with them. And what the auditor will do is examine all of your documentation. They'll visit your site, they'll interview people in your organization, and prepare a detailed report that will compare your current state with the IAAO standards. An IAAO audit is a great tool for documenting your current state and getting an objective third party whose opinion really matters to the people who you're going to have to convince as you go through your process. It's going to provide specific recommendations for making your office compliant with IAAO standards. Now, to the degree that your strategic vision includes coming into compliance with the standards, the audit can provide a roadmap for building a plan. So I also recommend that you get really familiar with the IAAO technical standards. You should know what's in them, because if you're going to try to build an office that's going to be IAAO compliant, you ought to know what all the standards are. Now, this audit is not a replacement for you building a plan. You're still going to need to build your own plan, but this is an important piece that can help you get a leg up, especially on the current state assessment. All right, so this is an exercise that's a lot of fun in a group, but you can still do it in this recorded format. Set a 60-second timer. And then when you start, make a list in 60 seconds of all of the business processes that take place in your office. When time runs out, look at your list. Show it to some other people in your office. See if they can think of things that you did not. So go ahead and work through this exercise. So now that you're done, can you see the value in engaging different perspectives or points of view? No one person knows everything, so it's important to have as much input from as many sources as possible. All right, if you're finished, we'll move on to our next exercise. So here's a question. Why did we want you to start with the strategic vision instead of the current state analysis? And I will say that I've been through this process a few times, and more than once with offices that started with the current state before they wrote their strategic vision. So what I'd like you to do is to list at least 3 reasons why it's important to start with your strategic vision instead of your current state. Take a few minutes to work through this and then restart the video. All right, so if you finished, these are some of the reasons that people typically come up with, some of their answers. Yours may be different. So one of them is that you really want your strategic vision to be pure. Starting with the current state may inhibit or limit your vision, which is why you want to one reason to start with strategic vision. Your current statement may be too focused on flaws. Starting with the strategic vision is a more optimistic approach. Writing the strategic vision first may actually help you set some priorities. Writing the strategic vision first is more goal-focused and more goal-oriented. And starting with strategic vision gets you thinking about resources and resource allocation. So now we've come to our next exercise. So in this exercise, what I'd like you to do, now that you've thought about your strategic vision and done some analysis of the current state of your operation, what are the 5 most difficult or critical challenges that you will be facing? And how can they be overcome? So for example, you might say, we have poor data quality. We should take an inventory to identify missing or incorrect data elements and then define a data collection or correction project to address them. So take about 15 minutes, work your way through this one, come up with 5 challenges and how you think you could overcome them. All right, so now that you're done, let's examine some of the common answers that we get. Staffing is something that most people identify. They have difficulty recruiting and retaining good staff. Succession planning, or how do they promote people, backfill positions, make sure that if any important person leaves, that there's someone ready to take their place. Handling complaints and appeals, especially if you're instituting a new process. You're going to stir up a hornet's nest of new complaints and appeals. How do you track performance of your staff? How do you track the performance of the assessments? Analyzing, validating sales is a challenge for many people. Managing all this new technology becomes difficult. Answering or responding to all the emails. Handling litigation. Training staff. Organizing and managing a revaluation project. Permit processing. And listing new properties or changes in ownership in a new system. So these are some of the things that people have identified. You may have others on your list. Okay, now we're going to take a few minutes to talk about one of my favorite subjects, humanology. We are becoming an industry that is increasingly driven by technology, but we can't forget the humans that make it possible for us to do what we do. I have found that behind every successful organization, there are a relatively small number of really great people. They should be cherished. So let's think about the qualities that make some people more valuable than others in our organization. Some have specialized institutional or technical knowledge. Some are great team players that can work with other people and really help move the ball. Some are great communicators who can attend meetings, get your point across, get other people to have buy-in and get them on board. Some are just really passionate about what it is that they do. Some are great innovative thinkers. They're able to get out of the box and come up with solutions that other people don't think of. Some are just great problem solvers. Give them a problem and they'll find a solution. So these are the things that make the people that are going to be involved in your project valuable. And you want to identify them and start to think about, well, how can I bring them along? How can I keep them more involved with my project? Put them in leadership positions. Have them help me achieve buy-in. All right, so our next exercise is on humanology. So what I'd like you to do is take about 15 minutes and list the people who are going to be critical in building your plan and moving your office forward. What are the roles that they play? What are the qualities that make them valuable? And most important, what can you do to reward them in their efforts? All right, so now that you're done, let me just mention some of the rewards that other people have mentioned and that have done this exercise. So one thing you can do to reward people, because we are frequently limited in what we can do in terms of giving them money, so you have to find other types of rewards. So one of the things that you can do is to give them more autonomy in their work. Engage them more in the decision-making process so that they have more ownership of their work and what they're doing. You can do things like send them to conferences. You can give them educational opportunities to advance their careers, even if it isn't in your office. You can let them work from home. That's a common solution post-pandemic. You can recommend them for advancement in your office, or you can give them special assignments. So next, I want to talk about one of the most critical aspects of any project, And one of the most important aspects of any revaluation project or change in the valuation process is the story that is told around it. Controlling the story is a critical but often overlooked part of the success of any project. And the assessment office should take control of the story as early in the process as possible. If you don't, someone else will. And then it won't matter how good a job you do. The story that will be told will be their story, not yours. You want to be proactive. You don't want to be placed on the defensive, be in a position where you're responding to fear-mongering or every self-serving allegation that's going to be leveled or directed at you. So what does controlling the story mean? Well, it starts with identifying your stakeholders. We often think about property owners as stakeholders, but stakeholders also include, besides property owners, your assessment staff, politicians, people who provide services to the administration or to your office, oversight organizations, community advocates, the financing arm of your operation. And you have to think, well, how am I going to reach these people? What are the methods for spreading a message? So, as I've mentioned, you definitely want to start a public relations campaign, an organized effort for outreach. And that would include posting things on your website, and that would be videos, articles, interactive dashboards for the public where they can see the results of what it is that you're doing. You want to be proactive about contacting the news outlets. Don't wait for them to come to you. Go to them with the story. You want to attend community events where you're talking directly to the people. You should have a YouTube channel where you make videos about what it is that you're doing and post them so everyone can see them. And of course, you want to use TV and radio to promote your message wherever possible. Billboards are an often overlooked way of getting a message out. But in getting your message out, you have to ask yourself, who do my constituents, who do my stakeholders trust? Who will be the effective messengers? Hint, it's probably not you. So if there are local celebrities that you can hire, you can engage to do short promotional spots, they're great messengers. Other municipal officials, other stakeholders who understand your process and get buy-in and are willing to talk to other people about it. They're great messengers. So here's an example of one of the things that they did in Maricopa County to help get their story out. They actually produced this little animation video. It takes a couple of minutes, and I'm going to play through it.
Arizona voters changed property tax laws and how property taxes were calculated in 2012 by passing Proposition 117. Enacted in 2014 for the 2015 tax year, Proposition 117 changed two items relating to your property value. Your property taxes are based on your limited property value. Your limited property value increase is capped at 5% each year and cannot exceed your full cash value. There are, of course, exceptions to this law. One of the more common exceptions is if you change your property's use or major physical characteristics. Say you build your dream home on what used to be vacant land, or make a major addition to your home, like adding a second story, basement, or in-ground pool. In these cases, you may see what is referred to as a Rule B applied to your property. When a Rule B is applied, the limited property value may, by law, change by more than 5%. If a Rule B is applied, the limited property value will be reset to a level or percentage of your property's full cash value that is comparable to that of other properties of the same or similar use or classification. The Rule B percentage or ratio can vary depending on the property class and the year in which it is applied, and can result in a drastic change in your limited property value and property tax bill. Along with changes in a property's use or physical characteristics, Rule B calculations are applied to property that was erroneously omitted from the property tax rolls, or was split or consolidated from January 1st through September 30th of the current valuation year. If you're considering making a major change to your property and want to know how it will impact your value, we're here to help. Visit our website or call us at 602-506-3406, and a member of our team will be happy to assist you.
So that's a good example of using video. A lot of people won't read documents, but they will watch videos. And you could have this video on your website where people can access it. You could have it playing on a loop in your office, in your waiting rooms where people come in. You can have it on your YouTube channel. So for more examples of things that Maricopa County did in terms of producing educational visits, you can visit this website. So now our next exercise will be about controlling your story. In one paragraph, I would like you to summarize in general, the story that you want to tell the public. Why are you doing what you're doing? And then I want you to list the stakeholders from whom you're going to need buy-in. I want you to describe some methods that you can use to tell your story to stakeholders and to your constituents. And I'd like you to identify some effective messengers who can help tell your story. And consider, who would you want to engage or who would you need to engage to help you with controlling your story? Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the organization of a modern assessment office. Many assessment offices were organized in the mid-1900s. So modernizing your office or running a revaluation project may require some restructuring or reorganization. Organizational structures may have been updated, but many offices still follow the paradigms of the one account at a time era. So doing things like using property record cards or computer systems that display or allow you to work with one account at a time and don't make connections between related accounts in order to aggregate relevant information. Using zip codes, census tracts, or voting districts to define locations instead of more modern market-derived methods. True mass appraisal follows a completely different paradigm where you never really look at one account at a time, except when you're entering or changing data. Everything is always considered in its relationships to other similar accounts. So it requires more specialization, different business processes, and even jobs that were unheard of as little as 20 years ago. Most modern offices have a modeling operation. Where does that operation belong? Does it belong under the unit that's being modeled? So would you have a separate unit for doing non-residential modeling versus residential modeling? A lot of people will put their modeling operations under IT, but IT is not modeling. It's a different discipline. And having modelers report to non-modelers can be a problem. People who they report to need to understand the activity. GIS specialists also need to understand the needs of the assessment office. And a lot of offices will have generalized GIS specialists who don't really understand the assessment process, and that can be a problem. Data scientists and website developers should also not be generalists, but they have to understand the data that the assessor's office is using and the business processes of the assessment office. So where would these jobs fit in a traditional organizational structure? And where should they fit in a modern organizational structure? Assessment offices are typically organized vertically, horizontally, or as hybrids. In a vertical organization, each unit is self-contained or self-sufficient. So for example, you would have the office building unit that's self-sufficient. Their appraisal, clerical, and even GIS staff collects, enters data, validates sales, handles complaints and appeals, analyzes performance, builds and runs models, or makes projections, value projections, reviews values, and even does its own mapping. So many offices will have residential units set up in a vertical fashion where The entire unit is kind of self-contained. In a horizontal unit or organization, a variety of specialized units serve the entire organization. So you might have one sales validation unit that reviews sales for the entire department. The modeling unit would build, run, and maintain all models, both residential and non-residential, models of all types. And the GIS unit would manage all the spatial data and mapping for everyone. In a hybrid organization, some units are self-contained or self-sufficient, while others are serviced by specialized units. So residential units might be vertically organized, but sales validation might best be set up as a horizontal service. Because GIS people are hard to come by, it might not be practical to budget and embed GIS within each unit, but to follow the horizontal structure for that service. So now I'd like you to do this little exercise about the strengths and weaknesses of vertical, horizontal, and hybrid organizations, because we'd like you to be able to avoid the weaknesses and play to the strengths of each. So I want you to take as much time as you need, list both the strengths and weaknesses of each type, and then we'll come back and look at some of our more common answers. All right, so some of the strengths of having a vertical structure is that it avoids bottlenecks that can cripple the entire project. So if you get a bottleneck, its effect is limited to one unit or one function. It promotes teamwork within the units. People have to work together to get everything accomplished. All the handoffs are within the units. And it promotes a general top to bottom knowledge of the entire function of that unit in all of the members of the unit. The weakness is that it limits general expertise about the functioning of the entire assessment operation. It can lead to cross-unit inconsistency. If you have several residential units under different supervisors, they may be doing each one may do its business process a little bit differently, and as a whole, this can generate inconsistency in your and uneven performance. And it's going to require more personnel because you need to assign more clerical staff, more data analysts, more modelers to each unit. The strengths of a horizontal unit, where everybody's more specialized, is that it does promote specialized expertise. If people just do sales validation, they get very good and very fast and very efficient at doing sales validation. And so it allows you to operate with fewer personnel across the entire operation because you're going to be more efficient. However, it can create a bottleneck. You could have, say you get a lot of sales reported and the sales validation unit gets bogged down. That would affect the entire operation. And then it limits the broad expertise that's needed when you want to promote someone to a higher level within your organization. People get very good at doing specific jobs, but nobody's really good at doing everything that the office needs. And then it can create battling business units, or it could limit cross-unit teamwork. And that's something you want to avoid. When we talk about hybrid units, well, being a hybrid organization can maximize your flexibility. It allows you to go horizontal where you need to and vertical when you need to. And therefore, it allows you to get the best of both organization structures. But if it's not well handled, it allows the worst of both. So you may, if you have a horizontal structure that doesn't routinely transfer people to perform other structures, other functions, that can be a problem. So for this next exercise, I'd like you to draw the current organization chart for your office. Or if you have one, you could just examine it. Are there problems or inefficiencies that are the result of the way your organization is structured. So for now, we just want you to identify those problems. Take as much time as you need. All right, so now that you've looked at your organizational structure and identified some of the problems or issues that it might be presenting, what revisions would you make to the organizational chart for your office? How will these changes solve problems or reduce inefficiencies that are a result of the current organization? So now let's take another look at our roadmap. We're going to do a deeper dive into some of these specific activities, but considering what our discussion so far, has your view changed about how some of these elements might fit into your plan? And are there additional elements that may not be on this chart that you would want to add? So hiring, training, and retaining staff is a big problem for many offices. So your strategic vision for the assessment office has to address adequate staffing requirements. And staffing typically includes administrative staff, appraisal staff, modelers, clerical or support staff, GIS staff, IT support, consultants, and maybe even interns. But here's the thing, if you are inadequately staffed in any classes, before you can proceed, you have to understand why you're inadequately staffed in those classes before you can make proposals for change. And you also have to consider, are there any new classes of staff that you may need to create or bring on? So here are some potential new or non-traditional classes of staff. Management analysts that look at promoting efficiency within the workflows of your organization. Innovation strategists, people who specifically look for new and better ways to do things. Operations directors, who are not associated with any particular unit or function, but to sort of look at how to keep the entire operation running smoothly. Legislative analysts, so you may need people to look at, if there are laws that are holding you back, you may need to look at people who can help rewrite those laws and to lobby to get things changed in ways that will make your office more effective. You may need people who are devoted strictly to doing training. Training should be a constant and ongoing process in your office. And so it may make sense to have a small number of people who are dedicated entirely to this function. Data scientists, those are people who are going to analyze, organize, look at better ways to collect data, update data, manage your data. So what are some ways that we can use to recruit staff? I've never met anyone who grew up wanting to be an assessor. So people come to this career in unusual ways. What are some of the ways that we can recruit them? Well, we can start by making sure that our pay levels and benefits packages are commensurate to the degree of expertise that people need to do these jobs. We can post openings on LinkedIn, trade forums, or social media platforms. This is a good way to attract talent. You can go and speak and appear at career fairs. This is a career that people never consider. So being at a career fair can open some eyes and maybe attract some people. You should form partnerships with local colleges and universities, and you should speak at them and present your case there as often as you can. You can sponsor interns. So we had a very successful internship program for our sales validation unit. where we would bring people in to assist in the technical aspects of sales validation, and some of those people went on to become full-time employees in our department. You might offer a hiring, but you might consider being able to offer hiring bonuses to people that sign on. So here's an exercise on your staffing. I want you to put in as much as you can the current number of people in each of these classes: administrative, appraisal, modelers, clerical, support, GIS, IT, consultants, and interns. And then next to that, I want you to list how many people you actually think you would need to do, and describe the main function of each class. And what new classes or positions would you add? So this one can take you some time to work through. So go ahead and then we'll move along. One of the things that you're going to want to do if you're starting a project is to take baseline performance measures. So in order to understand if the changes that we're making are actually leading to improvement, you need to do, as part of your current state analysis or assessment, what's the state of, measure your performance. So at the very minimum, you should do a baseline ratio study. And those baseline ratio measurements should include the level of assessment, how close are you to the market, but also the measures of variability, the COD, PRD, or the PRB, if that's what you use. And these measurements should be stratified in as many ways as possible. Now, typically when we do ratio studies and report, we may have one number for the entire county, and it's like a pass-fail. But this is for a different purpose. This is for allowing you to do diagnostics to see specifically where are you performing well, where are you not performing well, and are the things that you're doing making a difference in the places where you're not performing well. So you should look at your statistics by neighborhoods, by property classes or property types, by administrative units, maybe even by the evaluator or appraiser. And by key attributes: are you doing well in certain age groups but not others, certain size properties but not others, condition, quality codes, etc. And you want to take the same measurements at the start of the process, at every critical juncture or every critical point in your process, and at the end of the process. So if we were doing a project that involved modeling, we would take our measurements before we started. We would take measurements based on the projections from the models, and then we would take another set of measurements that at the end of the process, what were going to be the final results. So here's an example that we used in Philadelphia when we did our first project using regression modeling. So at the beginning, we had 4 classes of measuring the COD. And the lightest color was acceptable by IAAO standards, and as you got darker, they were even degrees of not being acceptable. So you can see that the coefficient of dispersion for the entire city was actually pretty poor. At the end of the project, you can see how much better it got. We had almost no areas, very few areas. There are 650 different analysis areas here. And at the end of it, I think we only had 3 that were still in really bad shape. And we had to create a new class for wow, way better than we even thought. So this is a very simple graphic measurement that can demonstrate how much effect the project had. But your performance extends beyond valuation and ratio study metrics. So some things that you can do is you can identify streams of work, number of permits that are being processed, inspections, field inspections, number of appeals that you're getting and answering, applications for abatements and exemptions. So you can identify work streams and look to see, come up with metrics that quantify how the work is being processed, and then look to see if you're getting better or worse. So for example, Maricopa County did a study of their exemption applications as they were implementing a new CAMA system. So they looked at how many are typically received over a period of time, and on average, how long does it take to process them? And they were looking to see, did we bring that number down? What are some of the roadblocks that delay processing? So they wanted to see if their new process helped them clear those roadblocks. And ideally, migrating to a new CAMA system or business process, you want to ensure that the performance is at least at the same level or better. So you might measure the number of complaints or appeals that you get after the project's done, because the test of public acceptance is one of the best tests that there is. If the public accepts the work that you've done, you'll get fewer complaints and appeals. And then what is your win rate on those complaints and appeals? What's the dollar loss to complaints and appeals? When we talk about how you demonstrate return on investment, the dollars that you lose in the complaints and appeals may be a great way to pay for some of the things that you need to do. But how about also other things that we might not typically think of? What about sick time used both before we did this project and afterwards? Because employees that are overly stressed take more sick time than those that are happy in their work. So if you see a decrease in sick time, well, people take vacation, but if you see a decrease in sick time used per employee, that's a good indication that you've done something good for your staff. What about the number of inquiries that you get? If you develop a nice forward-facing application that gives information to people and promotes transparency, you should see a decrease in the number of not just complaints, but the number of inquiries that you get. What about looking at your sales validation process, the ratio of invalid to valid sales? Is that changing? Are there codes that were being overused or misused that are no longer being overused and misused? You can look at bad or missing data elements. Has that changed after the implementation of a new business process? Are you getting better data? What about the number of inspections, field inspections that are being done? If you create a way to do field inspections more efficiently, you should look at the number of inspections that a person's able to do over a period of time. So these are just some of the additional performance measurements that you might want to take. So we want to talk about data and data quality. As subjective decisions and processes are replaced with objective ones, data becomes paramount. Good quality data is a requirement for any modern assessment office. Your data must be accurate, complete, and easy to access and change. Data quality analysis is used to measure completeness, so that is how many number of nulls and zeros missing and incorrect data. Survey samples for accuracy and to gauge representation of unsold properties. Does our data adequately reflect both sold and unsold properties? Sales data should contain attributes as they were as of the time of sale. And you want to have data stored in as few silos as possible, with each element stored in only one place. And any data that is found to be incomplete or inaccurate is going to require collection or correction. So Maricopa County did a study of data before and after the implementation of a desktop review program. And what that showed is that the overall statistics, COD, PRD, PRB, improve slightly with better data. And most modelers that I know will tell you that if you really want to improve a model, the best thing you can do is just feed it better data. The coefficient statistics, if you look at that were coming out of the models, the T statistics, the correctness of the coefficients improve significantly with better data. And in terms of the values that were projected, parcels that had correct data before and after saw a slight decrease in their estimated values after the model was recalibrated on cleaner data. And Jennifer Rearich wrote a paper, Garbage In, Garbage Out, Implications of Data Quality for Valuation Models. And you can find that in the JPTAA Volume 18 number 1. If you'd like to read more about it. So if you're migrating to a new system, you want to make sure that you fix your data before you migrate. This is one of the most common errors that assessment offices make. They get a new system, they take all their garbage data, and they just load it into the new system during data conversion. The problem if you do this is that it becomes really hard to identify and correct bad data in the new system. So you want to make sure that you do all of your data correction and analysis before you convert your data. I was once at a conference for a CAMA vendor, and I overheard 2 of their customers speaking, and one of them said, "Where are you in the process?" And the answer was, "Well, we're in data conversion." To which the first person asked, "Well, which one, your first, second, or third?" So data conversion is time consuming and it's expensive. You want to do it once, you want to do it right. And that means you want to inventory every element from your current system. You want to map where it came from, where it went, how it's going to be stored in the new system. And then you want to validate all of the migrated values against the original source data. I once saw a client who had just dumped all the new data into their old data into a new system, but the formats between the system weren't the same, and the data became was corrupted in the new system. So when they went to extract it, they had a bunch of garbage. So you have to validate that all of the migrated values are what they should be. What you thought you put in is what you actually put in. So our next exercise involves data and data quality. What I'd like you to do, I know you don't have access to your data right now. You can't do a data study, but just give a brief summary of the state of the data in your office. And you should include how that data is collected. Is it objectively collected, subjectively collected? How is it stored? How often is it reviewed for accuracy and completeness? What elements would you consider to be the most reliable? What elements are the least reliable? Now, how would you plan to improve data quality? All right, next up, I'd like to talk a little bit about sales validation. Many jurisdictions want to transition to using the sales approach and regression model in at least some part of their valuation process, but they don't really have a robust sales validation program or even data files that will support sales models. So the purpose of a robust sales validation process is to create a pool of sales that are good indicators of the value of similar properties. And this goes beyond a simple determination of a transaction status as arm's length. I've heard a lot of jurisdictions that say, well, we just use all of the arm's length transactions. But that's not really enough. The transactions have to be good indicators of value of similar properties. So sales validation should seek to eliminate sheriff sales, estate sales, sales between related parties, bids, foreclosures, sales to predatory speculators, or sales involving atypical financing, and sales where either the buyer or seller are under duress, as well as any other transactions that do not represent normal market activity between willing and knowledgeable parties. So the sales validation process then needs to examine each transaction to look at the specifics of how that transaction's occurred. Does it, beyond meeting the test for arm's length, is it a good indicator of value for other similar properties? And the other thing that you need to do is to capture attributes of the property as of the date of sale, and to determine if the transaction meets the criteria for coding as valid for use in valuation. The sales validation process should be standardized to promote consistent decisions and applications of value validation codes. So there should be as little subjectivity in the process as possible. All right, so in this exercise, I would like you to describe your sales validation process. Specifically, I want you to answer, do you inspect properties as sales are reported to capture characteristics at time of sale? How do you capture characteristics at time of sale? And do you keep attributes at time of sale in a separate file? Do you have a well-documented process for validating sales? And do you time trend sales? Take as much time as you need to work through this. So in this next exercise, what I'd like you to look at is who performs your sales validation. Some offices will assign sales validation to the people who are managing those accounts. And what are some of the advantages and disadvantages to taking this approach? I want you to list at least 3 of each. Other offices assign sales validation to a special unit that just does sales validation. And what are some of the advantages and disadvantages to this approach? So take some time to think through this, and then we'll examine some common answers. All right, so the biggest advantage to having the account managers do the sales validation, and this counts for more than one. I'd say list 3, and I'm only showing 2, but this counts as more than one. It allows those people to stay in touch with the market in general. They're seeing the sales, they're looking at the way the sales relate to the values, they're able to see change as it's occurring in the marketplace. So that's a big reason to have your people who are responsible for the accounts doing the sales validation. Another advantage is that it limits bottlenecks. Your bottlenecks are limited to each account manager, not to the entire sales validation operation. But some of the disadvantages to this approach is that you may get inconsistent validations, inconsistent use of codes, or even misuse of codes. It may be easy for a person to ignore emerging trends. So if prices are going up in an area, but they're saying, oh, these high prices are anomalies and I'm going to invalidate these transactions, they wind up ignoring the emerging trend. And the quality of your validations from one account manager to another can be very inconsistent. So in assigning sales validation to a special unit, the obvious advantages are you have a small number of people who are doing the same work over and over and over. They get very good, very efficient at it. You're going to get consistent validations. They're going to see trends because they're looking at the same time trends over more than just one small subset of the work. And they may, as a body of work, be able to time adjust those sales so that your account managers are always looking at sales that have been adjusted for time. The disadvantages are, well, your managers can lose touch with the market. If they're not seeing the sales come across their desks, they may easily lose control or touch with the market. And so you have to make sure that there's some way that they are still seeing the results of the sales validation and have access to the activity, what was validated, what was invalidated, so they still have access to that even if they're no longer making the decisions. And you could have a bottleneck in the sales validation unit can create a bottleneck for the entire department, and that's a risk. Now let's talk about the valuation process. We often think about the methods that are used to estimate values, but the valuation process also includes the methods that are used to collect and validate data. This can include field inspections, remote imagery, information that's contained in permits, visiting or scraping websites that contain property or sales data, and even data interpolation. Some methods are much more reliable than others, and you always want to promote the most reliable method available. The technical application of those methods used to calculate values is also important. The projection engine is a vital but often overlooked piece of the puzzle. We often assume that the CAMA system will calculate values, but this is not always the case. especially if you are using engineered features that don't reside natively in the CAMA system, or a model specification that is not supported by the CAMA system. Some CAMA systems only support additive models, and you may want to use a multiplicative model or even a nonlinear model. So you may need to buy or build a projection engine. And the valuation process also includes the means by which the values are reviewed or revised. A good market value review tool will group comparable properties, show time-adjusted prices for properties that sold, support comparison of market values and rates to time-adjusted sales and to other comparable properties, and also allow for revision of values in a manner that is consistent for all properties within a comparable group. So you consider that the purpose for this entire undertaking is to change the valuation process for at least some classes of properties. These subsystems must be addressed in your plan. So now we have an exercise about your valuation process. So what I'd like you to do is to take some time to describe the current valuation process for each of these classes of property. Most likely they're not the same. It's not going to be the same for all properties. In each case, you want to look at, well, how are the values determined? How are values reviewed? How do we measure performance? And as you're moving forward, what of your process would you like to keep and what would you be interested in changing? Now, again, this is one of those things for which there are no right or wrong answer. Well, there are some wrong answers, but there's no one right answer. So take your time, work your way through this, and we'll meet you on the other side. Now for one of my favorite subjects, modeling. Those of you who know me know that I've been writing regression models for quite a few years, and I've written hundreds of regression models. If you plan on using regression models to project values, you will need to either build or train a team to write models, and or hire a consultant to work with that team, or just to build the models outright. And it isn't enough just to have models. There are so many other considerations that have to come into play. So the environment that you're working in is an important consideration. Some people use, a lot of people in government use SPSS. Some people are using R. Some people use SAS. And all of them will do the job, but it depends on how the types of transformations that you need to write. Some are better or more flexible than others. And whether you want to cooperate with other jurisdictions that are modeling, you'd probably want to be working off of the same platform. You must understand the capabilities and the limitations of your CAMA system. So you need to understand, well, was the CAMA system going to support a multiplicative model? If I want to use a gradient boosting model, how does that going to work with the CAMA system? You need to understand how feature engineering will be incorporated. So feature engineering is when you take a data element from your system and you change it in some way to make it useful in modeling. So an example of that would be if you have a system that keeps garage size expresses it in terms of square footage, but in your model, what you're going to do is create categories. A one-car garage, a two-car garage, and so on and so forth. Different types of garage, attached, detached, built-in, etc. So if those distinctions don't exist in your CAMA system or your data files, how are you going to incorporate them or to bring them back from your models to get them into your system? So most jurisdictions will use at least one engineered feature to make their models work well. And so how those engineered features are going to be incorporated into their CAMA system or into their database system is a big consideration. How many models do you even need? So this is going to be a function of the number of observations you have and whether or not attributes and time trends behave the same way across your entire jurisdiction. So there's a science to figuring out how many models you need and what types of models. You don't want to do things, for instance, like mix markets in one model. You wouldn't Generally, you don't want to put like vacant land in with improved properties within one model because the attributes are going to behave differently. So understanding how many models you're going to need is a big issue. And then how are the models going to be used to project values? So what a lot of jurisdictions will do is they will export the data from a CAMA system and they will do their model, they will build their models in another silo because it's much more flexible to test and to try things and to try different types of transformations and to do some different types of feature engineering until they get what they think is the best model. And then once you have that set of coefficients and constants, how are you going to use and project values? Can you bring those constants and coefficients back into your CAMA system and let the CAMA system project the values? Do you need to build or buy a separate projection engine? So these are all another set of considerations. And last, how are those values going to be reviewed? As I mentioned in the previous slides, the market value review tool is really important. If you have a system that only allows you to review properties one at a time, it could take you forever to review thousands upon thousands of projected values. So you have to plan for how those values are going to be reviewed and revised by your team. So our exercise for modeling, what I'd like you to do is answer these questions. Do you have modelers already in your organization? And if not, are there people in your organization who would be suitable for the job, or would you have to hire or train them? Is there a job title, pay scale, and written description for modelers? And then I want you to look at what are the capabilities and limitations of your CAMA system. What kind of models does it support? How will feature engineering be incorporated? Do you already have a projection engine, or will you need to build or acquire one? And describe what your market value review process is. Will you need to build one, or are you happy with it the way that it is? So writing requirements is an important part of building out a plan. If you need to acquire a CAMA system, or if you have to create new job titles and descriptions, or hire a consultant, writing requirements documents and requests for proposals, or RFPs, will be necessary. And a requirements document is a list of all the things you need in a system or from a position or from a consultant. Your requirements should be as detailed as possible and should be drawn from as many perspectives as you can find. A good set of requirement documents are prerequisite to writing an RFP. Requirements should be as detailed and complete as possible. So what often happens is people will have a kind of a sketchy set of requirements, and they get into the project and they say, oh, we needed this, so let's add that. Oh, this is something we didn't think of, so let's add that. This is called scope creep, and it adds time and money to your project. And it's often the result of poor planning, and scope creep can just blow a project up to the point where you just run out of funds, and it's killed quite a few projects. So you want to make sure that you have the best set of requirements possible before you start working in a production environment. So here's a little exercise on writing requirements just to practice with and to see how big a job this actually is. So how would you plan to capture and document requirements for these subsystems? And if you have the time to do all 5 of them, that would be great. But if you just want to pick one so you can get along, continue through the workshop, that'll be fine too. But look at your modeling operation or your data collection operation, the CAMA system that you'd like to have. What do you need it to do? What are the workflows? What are the processes, the business processes that have to be considered? What do you want out of your market value review tool? Or possibly your sales validation program. How do you want to look at, create a science of looking at every transaction and validating it for use in your evaluation process? And who would you have participate in writing the requirements for each of these subsystems? List the people. So you should take a good amount of time with this exercise. This is one of those exercises when we do this workshop live, we really can't give it enough time. But this is one of those places when you're writing requirements, just like when you're documenting your current state, you want to spend a lot of time writing requirements. All right, so once your requirements documents are completed, you can begin writing requests for proposals or RFPs. Writing an effective proposal is a course in its own right, so there's no way I can cover it within the limits of this workshop. But here are some online resources that can help you write RFPs. So you should check these out, get some ideas as to help you write your RFPs. Another good thing to do is to read RFPs that have been posted by other offices. And then when you do this, you just don't want to read the RFP and go roll with it. Many years ago in the mid-2000s, the Philadelphia office put together an RFP for a camera system, and it got online, and people began copying it and using it as a template for writing their RFPs, which would have been great, except it was a terrible RFP. And if anyone had taken the time to contact us, we would have been able to tell you, oh, these are the things that we liked about it. These are the things that we thought were not good about that RFP, and it would have been more useful to them. So you should contact anybody who's written RFPs and ask if there are things that they would have done differently. And after you post your RFPs and you get responses, you want to look for the proposal that's going to best meet your long-term goals. You want to look for the vendor that's most aligned with your philosophy of service and the things that you want to accomplish. You don't want to just look for the lowest bidder. In fact, you almost never want to look for the lowest bidder. So we don't have an exercise for writing RFPs, but the next thing we want to touch on is the importance of putting training in your plan. So the linchpin of change is training. If people are not trained, they're going to be really resistant to moving or to accepting change. So your success is going to depend on all of the pieces of this project fitting together and functioning seamlessly with one another. And ideally, everyone in your organization should have an understanding of the entire project. You want to avoid need-to-know thinking. And I've been involved with more than one project where, they only talk to the sales validation team about sales validation. They only talk to the IT people about certain aspects of the project. They only talk to the residential people about certain aspects of the project. So as a result, there was a lot of fog around the office about how the entire thing was fitting together. And in some ways, because of that, because they didn't have multiple perspectives saying, hey, wait a minute, if you do this, it's not going to dovetail well with what we do. It created some problems. So you really want to avoid need-to-know thinking, and you want to have as many people as possible have as complete an understanding of the entire project as possible. Now, that being said, your training has to be well documented or it's going to be inconsistent. So people should have well-documented training manuals and exercises and resources that they follow no matter who they're in the room training. Otherwise, one group of people will learn one thing and another group of people will learn another thing. And that will lead to problems as you get into production. Many offices today are creating dedicated training positions. They're actually taking people offline of other positions in the office and they're dedicating people to just doing nothing but training. Now, the good side of this is that those people get really good at doing training. They get to be very efficient. They know how to answer the questions. The bad side is that you are taking somebody offline who might be productive in another way. So our exercise for training, I'd like you to take some time and write out who's responsible for doing training in your organization. Do you have training officers? Does each supervisor train their own employees? How is training conducted in your organization? And what are the business processes for which you have written instructions, manuals, and standards? And the ones that you don't, how would you go about developing them? So once that's done, you can describe the changes that you would like to make to your training operation And those are the things that you want to build into your plan. All right, so we've been talking about a lot of change. And once you have a handle on what you're going to need in terms of staff, equipment, software, consultants, etc., and you can estimate how much it's going to cost, you can look at options for how you can fund your project. One of the things you want to learn is to speak in what we call ROI speak. So everything that you're talking about should be presented as an investment. You want to count everything in terms of the return on the investments that you're going to make. So this is what we call ROI speak. Modernizing your office or running a reassessment project will improve efficiency, enhance equity, and present opportunities to raise revenues, and perhaps more importantly, keep more of what your office generates by reducing losses on appeals and complaints. When I was first making a pitch for a dedicated full-time modeling and analysis team in Philadelphia, I made the point that winning one appeal on a large office building that we would otherwise have lost paid for the entire modeling operation for a year. So that became an easy selling point because we won typically way more than one appeal in any given year. And so you can also measure the reduced rates of appeals and complaints on residential properties. And that's another big selling point. If you can go from having, you do a project and 10% of the people that get notices appeal, and after you refine and improve your process, only 1% of them appeal, you're going to be saving a lot of time and a lot of money and not giving away as much on losses. Improving customer relations by increasing transparency, telling your story, building forward-facing dashboards, and producing videos to convey relevant information are all things that will pay for themselves in pretty short order. I know of a jurisdiction that needed remote imagery, and the way they paid for it was to say, well, look, it's the expected savings in risk management that's going to pay for this imagery. If we have one less car accident a year, if our staff is out there driving around doing field inspections, if we can reduce the amount of time and their exposure they're out there, one fewer accident per year will pay for the remote imagery. And that was an effective argument for them. So you need to understand what funding sources you have at your disposal. There's your annual budget. Some expenses will need to be built into your annual budget, especially recurring costs like additional staff, software licenses, that kind of thing. But one of the things you can do is to look for enterprise solutions or expenses that can be shared across multiple departments. So aerial imagery is used by the streets department, fire department, police, licenses and inspections, transportation authorities, parks and recreation if they're looking at tree canopy cover. So the imagery is often purchased at an enterprise level, with all departments that are going to use the images pooling funds to pay for it. So instead of your department buying imagery, you find all departments that could use imagery and you all put money together to buy it. Some software, like your ArcGIS licenses, can be bought as enterprise license, which allows tremendous economies of scale and higher service levels for all users. And your department may not need a full-time web developer, but a couple of departments can pool resources to pay for that service. Data sharing, analysis, GIS services, these are all costs that can be shared at an enterprise level. Many counties and municipalities have money set aside for major one-time purchases that can be absorbed by the jurisdiction, not just the assessment office. So these funds are often used to purchase camera systems or to hire consultants, perform audits, and to purchase equipment. So you should talk to your financing arm and see what's available in your jurisdiction. All right, so here's an exercise for doing just that. Let's say that you decide that you need to acquire remote imagery. So what I'd like you to do is to write up the argument how you're going to justify or meet that expense by using ROI speak, the annual department budget, the enterprise solution approach, or maybe even capital improvement funds. The point is to look at multiple sources to try to find the money. So work on this for a while and then restart the video. We'll meet you on the other side. Now I want to talk about managing expectations. It's important that you keep the expectations of your stakeholders and your constituents within the realm of reason. You may not have unreasonable expectations, but other stakeholders definitely will. They may expect immediate results or improvement. In government, bad things happen quickly, but good things tend to take time to develop. There are no magic bullets. Everything should be presented as just being a step in a process. And some of these steps or some of these processes are going to be ongoing with no real terminus in sight. Part of controlling your story is going to be managing the expectation that your stakeholders are going to have. Many improvements will be iterative and cyclical. So if you build a catalog of models, many people will have an expectation that all of the values will be completely accurate and uniform with the first production run. But it doesn't work that way. So here's a typical loop around modeling. So before you build your models, you're going to hopefully do a data quality improvement project, and that is going to lead to an improvement in your evaluation process. And that is going to lead to looking at all the things that didn't come out well, or exception management. Why were these exceptions to our improvement process? And in that process of exception management, you're going to increase your domain knowledge, your understanding of your market. The things that need to be better about your data are going to change, and that is going to lead you into another cycle of data quality improvement. And that loop just keeps going and going and going, and it never really stops. If you acquire a CAMA system, there are people who will expect that the CAMA system to solve all the problems, and that just isn't going to happen. If you hire new staff, people will expect all of your bottlenecks and inefficiencies to disappear and your workflows to improve immediately. But that's not the way it works. Some things will improve immediately, but others may actually get worse before people really understand the new processes, and then they start to get better. So when you're engaged in this process, you want to try to spread the load out to as many people as possible, as many hands as possible doing the work, engage as many different resources as you can. And keep in mind that even if you're adding new people and new processes, those new employees don't become effective immediately. It takes time for them to learn how to be effective. Typically, it takes 2 or 3 years before a new employee reaches full performance. So now I want you to get a little practice managing expectations. So this exercise calls for you to look at these statements and to produce an argument to counter one of them. Now, I'm only asking you to do one here, but you will hear almost all of these statements at one point or another, and it is a good idea to prepare your counter arguments for all of them. So the statements are, look, this whole project that you're doing, it's just another way to raise taxes. Another thing that we hear people say, well, if you're using models, it's going to get all of the values right. Another one we hear a lot is, well, the new CAMA system is going to get all of the values right. Or, if you hire a bunch of new people, they're going to have an immediate impact. And I've even heard this one, well, we're moving away from using property taxes to fund the budget, and we're looking at other means of generating revenue. So take some time, work through as many of these as you're comfortable with, and prepare your counter arguments. What do you say when people say these things to you so that they don't have unreasonable expectations? All right, we are getting into the home stretch here. So here's that chart again. And now that we've talked about so many aspects or elements of building a plan, it's time for you to start putting one together for your office, for your jurisdiction. So we've kind of been working on different pieces of it, but now we want you to start putting it together. So what I'd like you to do is to look at this chart and to pick out the elements that need to be addressed in your plan. What are the things that you need to include? So I'd like you to either circle all the ones that that you're going to need to include, or if it's most of them, just cross out the ones that you're not going to need. And then we're going to start building out a timetable. So take your time doing this, and next we're going to talk about building our timetable. All right, now that you've picked all the pieces that you want to include in your plan and they're accounted for, it's time to figure out who's going to perform each task, the order in which the task will be accomplished, and reasonably estimate the amount of time each task will take. So you want to avoid picking completion dates before you've created your operational plan. Otherwise, the date you pick will essentially be arbitrary with no real basis in reality. And that means you want to start at the beginning and work forward. You want to give each task the amount of time it requires to arrive at a completion date that grows organically from the accomplishment of each task. I've been associated with projects, and I've seen project managers that essentially will start with an arbitrary end date for completion and then work backwards. We need this done by March of next year, and so therefore you have so much time to review values, so much time to model, so much time to collect and correct data, so much time to train people, and so on and so forth. And what this often does is it leaves an inadequate amount of time for one or more important tasks. So most likely your plan is going to be conducted in phases. And you're going to want to identify the number of phases that are going to be needed and which tasks or operations will be included in each phase. So here's an example of something you might start with. So in the spring of 2023, we're going to begin documenting our current processes and performance metrics. We're going to commission an independent audit of the department by IAAO. We're going to identify desired changes to the valuation process, create and train a modeling team, build and test a catalog of regression models, build a sales file to support modeling, add additional staff to the office, and then we're going to run at least 2 cycles of data collection, correction, and quality improvement. While all that's going on, our GIS units are going to be adding spatial attributes to the data files, and our administrators are going to begin a public relations campaign to take control of the story. We're going to validate recent sales. We're going to either acquire or build a market value projection engine, acquire or build a market value review tool, and build or acquire an appeal answer tool. We're going to aim to run a test revaluation in the fall of 2024, with the goal being that we want to try to run a revaluation project starting in the spring of 2025. Now, you should not make a statement like this until you've built out your plan as much as possible. So these last 2 pieces would only come after you've figured out all this other stuff. How many phases, what tasks go in which phase, and then you can build out the overall end date. So for example, some of the things that are going to go in the first phase of this operation, starting in April of 2023, I guess they've already started, we're going to start with our current state assessment. We're going to be interviewing staff to determine and document how the work's done. We're going to go on-the-ground familiarization with everything in our environment. We're going to look at all the business processes and the workflows. We're going to do a ratio study to establish baseline performance measures. And then at the same time, we're going to commission an independent audit from the IAAO, which is going to be a comprehensive review of staffing, equipment, organization, workflows, and assessment performance. And then while that's going on, our IT people are going to be building a file of transactions that includes characteristics at time of sale, that's what KDOS means, that are going to support modeling and valuation. During this time, we're going to create our operational plan. We're going to meet with the entire staff to present the plan for the future and how the operational plan is going to be implemented. And we're going to begin our public relations campaign. We're going to tell people, stakeholders, and our constituents, we're going to educate them on property tax and the assessment process and what changes we're going to make. We're going to present and publish our operational plan, and we're going to be focused on why we're making these changes and how we're going to go about it. The end goal here is to get buy-in from all of our stakeholders. Now, all of these things are going to start in the spring of 2023. So some of these, notice that these are color coded, so they're kind of coded as to who's going to do them, what units are going to do them. So it's our own administration and our own staff that's going to do the current state assessment recommendations, starting the public relations campaign. It's a consultant who's going to do the audit, and it's our IT staff that's going to start building the sales file. So once that's done, well, what's going to happen next? Now, once those things are done, we're going to start building our modeling team. We're going to train our modeling team. Now that we have our data and our sales file set up, we can start building our model templates. So we're going to train our team. We're going to build templates with models for whatever classes of property we want included in this project. So it might be single family, small multifamily, condos, vacant land. And we're going to establish our baseline performance metrics so we can tell if we're getting better and where we're getting better, where we're not getting better, so that we can use that as a guideline as we work our way into the production mode. While all that's going on, we're going to do a comprehensive data quality analysis on the data for all the unsold properties. So we're going to look at our existing data files for completeness and correctness. We're going to identify and report out parcels that require correction, and we're going to create a plan for how those are going to be collected. That data is going to be collected and corrected. We may want to do an analysis of our current assessment equity. We're going to identify, are we biased in the way that we're doing our assessments? And we want to identify the sources of bias and make recommendations for improvements. So and we're going to upgrade our sales validation process. We're going to modify our sales validation process so that we're confirming characteristics at time of sale. And we may need to refine the definition of sales used for valuation. So we've looked at, okay, what we want is sales that are reasonable indicators of the value of other similar properties and eliminate all others, even if some of those others are in fact arm's length transactions. So that's a redefinition of the sales that you want to use for valuation. That would be part of upgrading your sales validation process. And then you want to start to prepare a list of the functional requirements for a new CAMA system. We need a new CAMA system. The CAMA system we're using is very old. It's out of date. We want to acquire a new CAMA system. So again, these are color coded depending on who's going to do the various tasks. And these second phase activities, they don't have a start date. They're going to commence as soon as the first phase prerequisites are met. So as soon as we have a sales file, we can start building and training our modeling team and building our templates. Some of these things don't really have prerequisites, but once we determine what it is we want to collect, then our data quality analysis can proceed, and so forth. All right, so what would happen in the third phase of this typical project? So we're going to start surveying vendors. We're going to go to conferences. We're going to start soliciting demonstrations of CAMA systems and add-on systems, and we're going to try to start identifying those that meet our requirements. And then we're going to have our data collection project that's going to be ongoing, and this is going to continue until we're ready to go into production. We're going to be hiring. We're going to do staff augmentation. We're going to hire, promote, reorganize to enhance staff performance and efficiency. We're going to keep validating sales. We're going to validate our more recent sales. And meanwhile, our GIS team is going to be measuring and testing spatial attributes for inclusion in regression models. So until we have our model templates, they can't really do that. So there's a dependency there. They can start collecting data, spatial data, but they can't, in order to be able to make it useful in the regression models, they have to wait until the model templates are done. So this third phase we expect is going to start sometime around the spring of 2024, and it's going to be subject to the availability of some resources. All right, so what's in the fourth phase? Fourth phase, we're going to, now that we've are able to look at good data sales data, we have validated sales, we have model templates. We can begin to analyze and revise our neighborhood definitions and designations. We can run a test cycle of the entire model catalog. And then once we have those, we can build and test a method of projecting values from the models. We can build and test a method for reviewing and revising values projected by the models. And you wouldn't want to do either of these too soon, because until your models are performing well, you don't want to alarm people by projecting values that are not going to be probably the same quality of the ones you're going to go into production with. So even though you could start these two processes earlier, you may not want to. And now you're going to be able to document all your training and begin training your staff to use your market value review tools and to reflect other changes to workflows and business processes. And you're going to expect this to start, say, in the fall of 2024. So now, once all these pieces are in place, you want to actually run your reval project, and you can schedule it. So your plan should include managing a large number of complaints and appeals. So if you're going to change your valuation process, it's going to be like kicking a hornet's nest. You're going to get a lot of complaints and appeals. So in the spring of 2025, we're going to commence running a reval project, and that project may take us 6 to 8 months, and that's going to include vacant land, residential portfolio, as much of it as we can support with our staff. Again, we won't know this until we get our staff in place and they're trained. So determination of the project scope is going to be determined and finalized as we move through the process. We're not going to stay at the very beginning, this is the scope of the project. We're going to wait until we've done some planning, we've done our hiring, we've fixed all our requirements, we've made all our changes, and we can have a really good idea of what we can accomplish. So we're going to hope to do the entire residential portfolio at one time, and then create a cycle for periodic revaluation ongoing after that. A lot of people do it that way. There's a lot of different opinions as to whether you should have periodic revaluation that includes an entire portfolio at a time, or whether you should do it in pieces. Subject for another day. But even once you've done all those things, there are going to be some elements of the plan that may not be within the control of the assessment office and may require the participation of other agencies. So the plan for this next revaluation project isn't going to be contingent on the acquisition of a CAMA system. So it's increasingly happening that CAMA systems are not purchased by the assessment office, but they're purchased by another entity, such as a state, and state has to approve it. So your long-term or ongoing process here is going to be preparing an RFP, awarding a contract, acquiring the system. And this could be a multi-year effort, but you don't want to necessarily wait. If you need to do it, you want to do a reval, you don't necessarily want to wait to do it until you've acquired the CAMA system. You may be able to go ahead and do it without the CAMA system, which is what many people do. And in fact, in that process, it helps them create and understand what their requirements are for acquiring a new CAMA system. So as they're picking a system, preparing for it, now they're going to start preparing data migration from the old system to the new system. They're going to begin training staff to use the new system. They're going to begin documenting all the processes and workflows so that people can compare, how do we do it now? How will we do it once we have the new system? And you're going to continue in your public relation campaign. You're going to be implementing more public-facing applications, and you're going to really be telling the story not of what we want to achieve, but what we have achieved. So these will all be long-term, ongoing efforts with no real end in sight, although once your CAMA system is rolled out, then you have another cycle, begins a cycle of review and changing and making tweaks to what that system does, ordering customizations and so on. All right, so now, using the blocks or the elements that you circled on your elements charts, and actually a good way to do this is like make sticky notes out of those things and like have columns for your administrative staff, appraisal staff, IT staff, modelers, GIS staff, consultants, and then put those sticky notes in the columns where they belong. So you want to assign your tasks and projects to group in your organizations. And then you want to allocate time to each element, and then you add up the time that it's going to take under each column to figure out how to estimate the time to complete all of the tasks and projects. So this is the mother lode, and you should take a good amount of time to build out your timetable. So take as much time as you need, pause the video, and we'll start our closing. All right, so in the live version of this workshop, I actually created a fictitious jurisdiction and kind of described it with the goal being that maybe if you had some distance and you were working with partners, with somebody else, it might be best to do it with, you're both working on something that you don't know, a fictitious organization. You can skip this because you've been working almost entirely in this workshop on your own office and your own, your own kingdom. And you probably have a pretty good idea of how to do this at this point. If you'd like to work through this part of it, fine. So I'll explain what it is. Our fictional city is Gotham City. It's got 130,000 parcels. This is a breakdown of the number of parcels and the staff that's assigned in each case, both appraisers and clerical staff, to each unit. So here's a breakdown. 3 administrators, 2 residential, 1 non-residential. They have 22 field appraisers that do field inspections, data entry, consolidations, deleted, adding new accounts, answering complaints, appeals, determining valuation and review. There are 17 clerical employees, 2 GIS employees who are currently just maintaining the parcel layer and doing performance mapping, and they have a staff of 4 supporting their IT. Which includes managing data, doing the value calculations, providing technical support, building and managing the website, and doing most of the reporting. And they have a customer service unit of 3 employees that intakes and routes complaints, inquiries, appeals, public information. So this is some information on they're currently using cost approach with sales ratios as an adjustment factors for residential properties. They have data stored in many different silos, SQL databases, MS Access databases, Excel files. Their locations, they're using zip codes to determine locations, and they are sales validations being performed by the account manager. Attributes, they don't have a separate file of sales with attributes as of the time of sale. All attributes in the sales file are current attributes. Their training is done by the supervisors. Each supervisor is responsible for training their own staff. They don't have comprehensive digital imagery or remote imagery. What they have is digitized photographs that have either been taken by staff or submitted by constituents. All appeals are scheduled, heard, administered by a separate organization. So this office just has to do the answering, but they don't actually have to administer appeals. So with that information, see if you can create a plan, operational plan for Gotham City. And you don't actually have to build a plan, just describe the process. You don't need like details or specific actions, just kind of high level what your plan would look like. And your plan should address staffing, data migration, data enhancements, valuation changes to valuation processes, sales validation, organizational changes, how you're going to manage the public relations, and your training and documentation. How many phases will you plan for? What elements will be in each plan? Now, you've already done this with your own jurisdiction, so it may be repetitive. And again, you can skip this exercise. And when do you think you'll be ready to run the reval, and what work's going to remain for future cycles? All right, if you skip that last exercise, that fictional jurisdiction, these are just some closing remarks, some things that everyone needs to consider. So no plan survives contact with the enemy. This is a quote from Helmuth von Moltke. And basically what that means is you have a plan, you want to show it to everybody, you want to make it part of your story, but you have to understand that as you get into it, things are going to happen that are going to force you to change your plan. So your plan has to be flexible, and frequent revisions are going to be required. And don't be afraid to change your plan. It's not a sign of weakness. It just means you're a good planner. So in closing, I hope that this workshop has been helpful to you. And I want you to know that if there's any way that I can assist you in the future, please feel free to contact me. If you have questions about the workshop or comments or suggestions for improvements, if you send them to me at kevin@keenmac.com, I will try to reply to you. And I hope that you'll check my website and my YouTube channel. I have a bunch more resources for mass appraisers at both places. I have made videos of most of the presentations that I've done at various conferences over the years. There's articles, there's all kinds of information there for you. So I hope to hear from you, and good luck, and I hope that your plans work out. Thank you all so much.